fair to say there has been an explosion of popularity of mountain biking in Victoria. There are pockets dotted all over the place where people travel far and wide, destination hotspots for mountain biking. It brings tourists to areas, infrastructure is being built in bushland, but conversations are starting to be had around whether or not it's good for the environment and local habitat, and what if the trend dies out. Prue Bentley is your co-host today, joining you from ABC Ballarat, where, Prue, mountain biking is certainly big where you are in Ballarat.
Yeah, well, we've always been known as a big road cycling destination up here, but mountain biking is starting to take off too. We're seeing heaps of official and, I will say, some unofficial mountain biking trails popping up all over the place. The Mayor of Ballarat City Council recently said that they're going to pitch to host the mountain biking events in the 2026 Commonwealth Games. And in nearby Creswick, work has just started on a major project to create 60 Ks of bike trails in and around the town.
That's huge.
Yeah.
60 Ks. I wonder how much infrastructure would need to be built. You know, if your mayor is throwing your hands up and saying, we'll host it here, how much infrastructure needs to be built for that, or whether or not it's already existing and it's ready to go?
Well, I imagine it's a bit of both, to be honest, because we've got a fair bit of infrastructure already, and it depends on what kind of mountain biking you're talking about. I'm sure we're going to find out a bit more about the different scales of mountain biking right throughout this show.
Is there much argy-bargy that goes on where you are in Creswick around trying to balance the needs of the locals, trying to support people that are into mountain biking, making sure that the environment is protected as well? Is it something that's relatively heated?
Look, it hasn't been that heated in Creswick, I have to say. I'm sure that there are some people who have some concerns, but the planning permit has gone through and they've already started work. So it's something that we'll have to watch, because often these things it's where the rubber hits the road is when the trails are built and when people start coming in. So I guess that's something that's going to play out, but it's already playing out in different parts of Victoria.
Absolutely. From Creswick through to Warburton to the Otways, parts of the Dandenongs, you name it, mountain biking is certainly a huge pastime and passion for a lot of people. So with infrastructure going into parks and wilderness areas to support mountain biking, how do we balance tourism, local needs and the possible impacts on the environment? If you're a mountain biker, or if you're someone that lives in the area where people do mountain bike, our number's 1300 222 774.
On ABC Radio Melbourne and Victoria.
This is the Conversation Hour.
Rochelle Hunt with you in Melbourne. Prue Bentley is with you in ABC Ballarat. Already texts on this. My husband has been a mountain bike mechanic for about 15 years in the Macedon Ranges. There's a massive community. It's women, children and men. The riders do a lot of work on keeping the rails and the trails, I should say, clean and tidy and safe. And it's all volunteer work. That's interesting, Prue, isn't it? Saying, women, kids and men, because I still think that it will be changing, but I still think there's a stereotype around a mountain biker and who a mountain biker is and what that person looks like and how they act.
I think you're spot on there, Rochelle. The mountain bike trails that are really near my house are very much, there's a lot of downhill, double black diamond. It's real Daredevil City near my house, and the people that I see using those trails, I'm guessing about 14. There's a group of boys. They're having a fantastic time, but they are fanging it down those hills. But as we will find out, it's not just those people. We're hearing already from people who are saying, it's a family pursuit for us. It's something that we do to get out into the environment. So I think we really do have to change our perceptions.
Tom's in Warrandyte. G'day, Tom.
G'day, how are you?
Good. What did you want to say?
Yeah, I was just saying to your producer, I ride with a bunch of older gentlemen, so I'm over 50 and most of us are over 40. We go regularly to Derby, for instance, spend a lot of money out there. That the town has absolutely embraced us, or embraced mountain biking, and it's basically kept the town alive. I just don't get this whole trying to lock people out of the environment. You don't get the appreciation of environment. You don't teach kids what is absolutely worth it out there by locking people out. The facts are it's a low impact activity, and when they're built properly and when they're built with, as a legal trail, they are low impact and sustainable. That's how they're built. So
Tom, can I just ask, you're saying that Derby's doing it really well. What do you think it is that's making it work so well for them?
I think they embraced everyone in the town. So obviously there were a couple of people, and you talk to the locals out there, and there were a couple of people who were against it, but they couldn't really articulate why. It was just, we don't like it. But that has really turned around, and you really can't find a single person that is against the trails out there. It's absolutely given the town a second lease in life.
And we'll find a little later on too, Tom, thank you, that there's another town that's been given a second lease in life as well, that was once a logging community, and there, once you lose the major employer and all of that infrastructure in town, generations often leave. So mountain biking has been one area in the Otways that many believe has kept people there. But Prue, there's a text here that says, I'm a walker and mountain bike trails cause erosion and disturb the wildlife. And that's a little bit of what I'm keen in finding out today too. When you think about a bushwalker, right? You have a stereotypical image of a bushwalker, someone that's an environmentalist maybe at heart that wants to get out there and be in the environment. Is a part of the attraction when you're mountain biking the fact that you're out in the bush, or is it the adrenaline? And is there a similar connection to bushwalking, even though the two activities are vastly different?
Look, I think it's probably a little bit of both. And when I walk around the areas near my house that have mountain bike paths and bushwalking paths, they're pretty clearly signposted. But if you're not careful and you stray onto the wrong path, you could really come a cropper. So I think that there is something to be said for the intersection between, walkers and other park users. I think there's got to be a lot said about that today.
1300 222 774 if you want to join the conversation. Andrew Howison is the president of the Yarra Ranges Mountain Bikers. Already a full board of calls and texts, Andrew, on this. It's a really hot topic of those that either love it or those that have major concerns around it. What do you think is the future of mountain biking in Victoria? How big could it possibly get?
Look, I don't think there's a limit on how big it can get. And I really like what Prue said, that it's fantastic to see those young boys, 14, 15, outside playing and experiencing the outside world rather than being stuck inside on an Xbox or an iPad, which I think is just such a huge concern. As we move forward in society, we are at a crossroads, and we need to look at ways, if people want to get outside, and mountain biking has grown, almost 3 times in popularity over the last 3 years alone. If these people are saying, hey, we want to be outside and we want to recreate the environment and look after our physical and our mental health and build a stronger connection to land, then we need to look at not identifying, not letting the problems or obstacles hold us back, but we need to find solutions. Because, I went through a drive-through in Nunawading yesterday on the way to work, and it just made me realise how important it is for me that I'm able to go out for a mountain bike ride for the sake of my physical, but also my mental health, and for what it means in my day-to-day life when I leave the trails and the mountains, and, I tell people about the magic of the mountains and why we need to protect them,
Andrew, can I ask about the bushwalker issue? Because we've had a text in about the mixing of bushwalking and riding trails, and I think that there's always going to be a little bit of crossover. How does that work for you, and how do you police it when you're out in the middle of the bush somewhere when you do come across bushwalkers?
I don't regularly encounter bushwalkers because I ride on one of the very, very few mountain bike trails that we've got. Interestingly enough, mountain biking's up 232%. And the amount of trails we've got is being almost reduced by the day. We had more places to ride in 2019 than we do now. So naturally, there's going to be severe growing pains with that. I think it's the only sport in Australia that's actually growing, but having its opportunities for participation declining.
How many people are actually riding on specific trails, and how many are doing it freeform, so to speak? Bushbashing, I think, is the colloquial term.
Look, I don't know anyone that rides on walking trails. Everyone that I ride with rides on mountain bike trails, but the trouble is they're overcrowded because we've got so many people doing it and so little support. So the Dandenong Ranges has, thousands of riders turning up to ride them, and there's 13 kilometres of trail. how can that possibly sustain the growth in mountain biking and sustainably facilitate the sport and the experience that people are looking for with the land around them? The parallel between bushwalking and mountain biking, and I only use this as an example. I'm not insinuating this should happen, but let's say you've got, Mount Donabuang, which is very hotly contested at the moment, and the topic of mountain biking and mountain bike infrastructure. If you were to turn around tomorrow and put, a bikes only sign at the top of the walking trails, and I'm not for 1 second suggesting that be done, but the mountain bike community would go and use those trails. And I say that to highlight how similar mountain biking and walking are. The fact that there is so little roadblocks for approving more infrastructure for environmental appreciation with walking, but there is obstacle after obstacle with mountain biking. When the two are, cut and copy, they're the same thing, bar the rubber shoes or the rubber tyres.
Stuart's called in from Bannockburn. Stuart, what did you want to say?
Yes, I'm part of Friends of Bannockburn Bush, where we have sort of two separate groups of mountain bike riders. Ones who respect the native veg in the area and just ride on the built roads or in the sugar gum area. But there are others that come in with picks and shovels and build ramps and jumps and dig up the chocolate lilies and all the native grasses and all the orchids, and to ride their bikes. If they could have their sport without causing damage to the local environment, that's fine. But there needs to be some sort of organisation, club or licensing system to make sure they understand the area in which they're riding, which extends the argument of that previous gentleman. I don't think they appreciate just what it is they're riding in amongst of and enjoying. And, we need to give them a bit of training in that area.
It's a really good point, Stuart. Thank you. I mean, Andrew, Stuart's right. I mean, how do you know who's actually going off the trail and digging stuff up and making their own jumps and creating, their own trails to a certain degree and disrupting local habitat and disrupting the local environment? I mean, you need to sort of be able to manage that, and I don't know how possible that is.
And, that's our job, and I 100% agree with Stuart, is the fact that, the facilities and the opportunities aren't there. So we've got these kids that are going outside and doing it themselves, and they don't know what they're digging up, and they're not trying to cause any harm or damage, but they're just trying to get outside and play, and they've got nowhere to go. And, Stuart is absolutely right. There needs to be some sort of structure and sophistication and organisation around providing more mountain bike trails. And earlier the question
Who should that be?
That's what we're doing with Warburton. We've got the council behind it. We've got World Trail, who are one of the best trail construction companies in the world that are coming in to build sustainable trails, so the opportunity is there for these people to get out in the mountains. The question was posed before, what is it makes Derby so successful? And it's blatantly obvious. It's the fact that the council embraced it and all the user groups down there work together and live in harmony. And, the mountain bikers are uniting with the environmental groups to protect the forests around Krushkas and the Dam Busters trails from logging.
Andrew, thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good on you, Andrew. That's Andrew Howison. He's the president of the Yarra Ranges Mountain Bikers. A little later in the program, we'll go into a bit more detail too on those that are opposing some of those mountain bike trails in Warburton and some of the issues and concerns that they have. Let's have a chat to Dave. He's in Harriettville. G'day, Dave.
Oh, g'day there. Thank you for taking my call. I just wanted to highlight how positive a sport like mountain biking can be. We've got some amazing tracks in Bright and the surrounding area. We get out with our kids, they're 14 and 17, who really don't like spending much time with us at that age group, but we went and bought 4 bikes, all second-hand, and as soon as we talk about going mountain biking, they're both in. They have friends that have got into it because we do it. And from the health point of view, it's amazing. That's what I got into it for, was to keep fit over summer when I wasn't doing other things. And I love bushwalking. I do native veg work. I understand the concerns of that, but the benefits that mountain biking brings is amazing. It's getting people out in their 70s and 80s that would never have considered doing something like that, and that in itself is just keeping everyone fit and healthy. It's a great pastime and a great.
Hey Dave, can I just ask? You're talking about a way to connect with your teenage sons or your teenage kids. How do you talk about responsible biking, or do you have that conversation with them when you're out there?
Well, with regards to what you were talking about earlier about going bush bashing, it's actually not much fun because there's so many hurdles and obstacles and so many dangers. So we all stick to the local tracks, which are managed and maintained by a committee. And I'm sure with the local council, they are following guidelines. But we've also got a lot of national parks in the area as well, which are only bushwalker, and there is a really good mix. And that's one thing that I suppose is promoting is a mix of both of them.
And I wonder though, good on you, Dave, thank you, because we're getting a lot of texts here on almost like bushwalker versus mountain biker, very similar to car driver versus road cyclist. Not that we want to go down that
swimmer
path
versus
today.
jet skier, all of the
things.
binaries, huh?
There's a text here that says, I'm a bushwalker. Try riding a horse in your local bush only to be assaulted by a self-appointed super entitled mountain biker who thinks it's their right to go on top of everybody else. The bush bashers are prolific and they don't seem to worry about riding on private property either. That's from Joe. Let's have a Nick. Let's go to Nick in Warburton. G'day, Nick.
Yeah, hello.
What did you say?
I am living in Warburton and also the president of Warburton Environment. First up, we don't oppose mountain bike riding, but we have major concerns, and there's a group of us that have formed the Upper Yarra Sustainable Development Alliance, not just because of this, but it was an impetus to do it. Regarding the size and scale of the proposal around Warburton, it's over 170 kilometres of trails. International Park, not all of it, a third of it's in National Park, which is incredibly important biodiversity that we have there. That basically what we're saying is, first, the size of the proposal is too big for our community to manage, and it's the 4,000 or 5,000 tourists on top of what we already have, and we already have major traffic and tourism issues during many parts of the year. And the other thing is that we have many degraded landscapes around us. Why can't we go into those and utilise what we have? And the other really big thing that's a real concern for us is the bushfire risk. When you put people out into the bush, we have CFA saying that Warburton is one of the most highest bushfire risk areas in the world globally. We have one road in, one road out, and that is a major concern.
Yeah, the whole one road in, one road out is a huge issue, Nick. I couldn't agree more. And if you get thousands or tens of thousands of people at certain times of the year, that's something that would have to be addressed, you would think, pretty highly, Prue, when looking at bushfire season, how many people you've got in the area, how you can respond, how you keep track of how many people you've got out bush, so to speak, how you give them warnings, if there's fires, do you shut the area? If you're in a watch and act period, what do you do? That's a lot to manage there.
It goes to show just how many stakeholders there are in this when you're planning and trying to build this sort of infrastructure. It's not just it's tourism and it's going to be great for the local area or great for Victoria. There are just so many other questions to be answered.
Our number's 1300 222 774.
This is the Conversation Hour
on ABC Radio Melbourne and Victoria.
Rochelle Hunt with you in Melbourne. Prue Bentley is with you in Ballarat. We are talking, the pros and cons of the explosion of mountain biking popularity in Victoria. I'm sort of almost struggling, if you were to look at a map of Victoria, Prue, it's dotted around everywhere. We've got texts coming in from pretty much every part of Victoria that has got some level of interest or growing level of interest in mountain biking.
Yeah, there's this text that's just come in too. I'm a 67-year-old mountain bike rider and bushwalker for the last 30 years, living in Anglesey, multiple levels of tracks covering lots of levels and hundreds of Ks. And this texter says 99% of riders here respect walkers and slow down, and then points to something we're going to be chatting about later. Forest, which is a town in the Otways, was dead, but is now booming thanks to mountain bikers. Track abuse is very rare. And he also goes on to say, blame Cadell because he was a mountain biker first. So, let's be a bit more charitable than that, eh?
Well, James Myatt can certainly speak to that. He's the Manager of Economy and Business Enterprises at the Colac Otway Shire Council. And as that text just said, James, you know, this is something that is important for communities like where you are. Previously a logging town, and once that industry stopped, there would have been concerns around, well, how do you keep people in town and what's going to generate income for this community? Where is mountain biking slotted into this picture?
Yes, hi, Rochelle and Prue. It's incredibly important to Forest and our local area. As you mentioned, Forest used to be a logging town, hence the name. And about 25 years ago, that industry came to a stop when we stopped native logging in the area. And we, in collaboration with the state government, with DELT, Department of Land, Water and Planning, a trail network was built around Forest, which was one of the first trail networks, dedicated mountain bike trail networks in Australia at the time, and saw incredible visitation through its first few years and really revitalised the town as a tourism town. Now it's got a great caravan park, brewery, chocolatier, and a couple of other little accommodation and boutique cafes in town.
You always know a town's booming when a brewery opens, you know? When there's a boutique brewery, everything's going okay.
A ride followed by a beer and a burger is very popular with a lot of people in Victoria.
So, James, how is it going, and how are the locals treating it? Are they pretty happy with how it's gone? I mean, you've obviously been one of the on the first lines of this.
Yes, I'd say overall there's overwhelming support for the trails in Forest. There's a lot of people that live there that move there because of mountain biking. But also they see the importance of it to the town. And I can speak to this because we're currently going through a redevelopment of the trails where we're spending a few million building some new trails and revitalising some of the older trails. And we went through years of consultation with the community to understand what they want from the trails. What's our target market? Are we family? Are we hardcore double black diamond like someone mentioned earlier? And what we're trying to achieve now, the community is really behind, and we wouldn't be able to do it without them. It's only because of the community and some of the volunteer effort from the Forest Mountain Bike Club as well that we're able to do what we do.
Hang there for a minute for us, James. Rob's called in from Rowville. Rob, you're a mountain biker and an ecologist.
Yes, thanks for the opportunity to talk. Yeah, I guess I just wanted to give some clarity from an environmental and scientific perspective that to dispel some of the myths that mountain bike tracks have a negligible impact. Look, the reality is that even though we're looking at a track that might only be a metre or less wide, the issue when you try to build a mountain bike track in pristine environments is that you're really encouraging weed invasion into those areas. It's more than just the footprint, the 1 metre footprint. Yeah. But actually worse than that, we've got an issue with cinnamon fungus, which I think we've talked on the show before, which is a fungus, a soil-borne pathogen, which is actually killing whole swards of native species. So
Rob, how do you balance that as somebody who also likes to get out on your bike?
Yeah, I guess it's tracks where there's that are slightly in areas for mountain biking in areas that are slightly disturbed, that aren't pristine, that already have maybe historic grazing, for instance. That's fine. Then there's a lot lower impact.
If that area's already been there. Rob, thank you. James, when we look at the texts that are coming in at a rate that we cannot keep up with, and they are either mountain biking is the best or mountain bikers are, destroying the local environment, and I'm paraphrasing there, obviously. How much work and detail goes into working with ecologists like Rob, working with local environmental groups and ensuring that habitat, that certain species, that weed species aren't introduced, and that long-term the environment will be okay?
It's a huge amount of work, and Rob raises some really good points. We Took about 6 years to get to the point of the current construction that's happening. The last 3 years have included ecology reports, biodiversity, native species reports, and we've really adapted the trails to try and minimise the impact. And an example is we found or identified a breeding ground for long-nosed potteroo, which we wanted to protect, so we changed the trail alignments to avoid the area and to make sure we're not having any impact on that. We're also, one thing we're doing in the trailheads, actually, some of the issues that Rob raises, we're going to be putting in a bike wash as well. So we'll be encouraging people to wash down their tyres before and after they ride to try and minimise some of that impact. But also with the new trails that are being built, we're being very conscious of drainage lines as well. One, to reduce the ongoing trail maintenance so that there's good water flow off the trails, but also to make sure where that water's going is sustainable and isn't impacting the environment negatively.
James, can I pick up on something that was talked about just before about the fire risk? Because the Otways is a notorious high fire danger area, and also that one road in, one road out scenario. How do you manage that?
Yes, so we have a couple of refugees in forest, refuges for people to go when in places of last resort. However, it is a massive risk. There was a Code Red fire day or multiple a couple of years ago in Forest. So working through the mountain bike club, we actually put out communication to try and not use the trails over that couple of days. However, whilst it is surrounded by forest, we do have 2 or 3 roads leading out of it. So as long as we have forewarning, we should be able to evacuate people. But just on all emergency risk, not just fire, but also people injuring themselves on trails and other things. One of the benefits of a formal trail network like Forest rather than an informal trail network is that we're putting ESTA emergency markers throughout the trail network. So if anyone's hurt, anyone's in trouble, they can call up 000 and give their exact
What's reception
reference.
like out there?
Very good. We have coverage across the whole network.
Okay, that would be a priority, something just even as basic as that. Just finally, James, when we're talking about Forest and how it was once a logging community, it would have employed pretty much most of the people in town and the reason why people would have stayed and worked there. How many people does the mountain biking industry employ in that local area?
Afraid I can't give you a number because I don't know it. But what I'd say is we have numerous cafes and restaurants in the area as well as accommodation businesses that you can safely assume wouldn't be there in their current form.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be there if the mountain bike network wasn't created in the first place.
James, thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.
That's James Might. He's the Manager of Economy and Business Enterprises at the Colac Otway Shire. Gosh, the fire risk around this, it's a huge part of it, and I just wonder how involved all of the local CFA groups are in terms of planning, managing, knowing how big, how many volunteers you've got in the area, because when we start to think how many bodies are built up around this issue, we've got a huge volunteer shortage when it comes to our emergency services. So if you've got a high number of people in areas during peak periods and you don't have the same amount of volunteers for emergency services, gosh, it just...
And it goes to messaging too, so that when people do arrange a holiday on a day, they need to be aware themselves of if it is a high fire danger day, just don't go. You might have to actually cut your trip short. Sandy is from the Forest Mountain Biking Club. Sandy, hello.
Good morning, how are you?
Yeah, good. Now, we were just talking with James Myatt, who was talking about some of the economic benefits of the trails in Forest. You're from the actual club that uses it, and I'm guessing you maintain it. What's it been like for you?
Look, for the mountain biking community down our way, it's a pretty good and close-knit group. We've aimed to sort of do a lot of maintenance as much as we can, and I've actually been working in that group with James. It's been helping to deliver the new trail upgrades and the sustainability of the existing trails.
Is it hard to keep them upgraded though? Because with a lot of use, I'm imagining that they do get degraded, and with so many kilometres of track, it's hard to know, what state they're in after, a major rain event, for example.
Yeah, look, and that's quite true. And the whole reason why we're doing upgrades, Forest actually consists of two trailheads, two separate trail systems. And the one that we're working on at the moment is the one that's most susceptible to damage from rain. So we're trying to make them as sustainable as we can do. And the other trail system drains a lot better, and it's different ground. As far as the maintenance goes, we've got a pretty big community. We get a fair bit of feedback, and there is a couple of locals that do trail maintenance in their own time. The club tries to do trail maintenance in their time, and also DELP does a fair bit of trail maintenance out there as well.
So, Sandy, you say you get a lot of feedback from the community. When you're just, at the local cafe or you're at the pub on a Friday night, how do people feel about it? Is it something that everybody agrees with? Is everybody happy about the amount of work and infrastructure that's going into this trail?
Yeah, the thing about Forest, it's one of the oldest established mountain bike parks in Victoria, so the locals are pretty accustomed to its existence. And when we had all the information sessions for any of the upgrades, there was a lot of community consultation, and a lot of the locals got to put in, their opinions and thoughts on how that was to be set up as well.
So the whole community was involved. Sandy, good on you. Thank you. That's Sandy Maxwell. He is a part of the Forest Mountain Bike Group. This text, because there's a lot of talk about bushwalker versus mountain biker, and it says, as a bushwalker, I actually don't agree with Andrew, who we had on earlier, that there's no difference between bushwalkers and mountain bikers. Walkers are constantly moving on, and their footprint is spread out over large and designated areas, where mountain biking is more concentrated and the damage more intense. Vegetation in areas of mountain biking is completely destroyed, and it looks like a evacuation site sometimes. There's dump sites too. I've seen kids with shovels in areas of the Dandenong Ranges. I've also seen hand saws, people clearing trees and stumps from their path. I think more work needs to be done on the education and training for young mountain bikers, like Andrew said, so that it leaves a less of a footprint on the land. There's always going to be, pretty much in any group or any sport or anything that's gaining in popularity, those that follow the rules and those that don't. You just hope that that group of people that are, cutting down trees or taking out saws or digging up areas, you hope that they're really in the minority. And when you talk about education, where is that? Where does that come from?
Yeah, and I guess that's where the club environment is probably the most useful, because you've got people coming together, they're talking about it all the time, they're upgrading the trails together, they're actually looking after the environment themselves. So I'm guessing there'd be a difference between some people who are not necessarily part of clubs and just go and do it on the weekend and may be part of that cohort, and the formalised clubs.
Rochelle Hunt and Prue Bentley with you. I'm in Melbourne. Prue is coming to you today from ABC Ballarat, and we're talking about mountain biking and how we balance infrastructure and local needs and the environment. There's a text here because we were talking about phone coverage, and this says proposed Warburton network does not have full phone coverage, and Warburton is one that's being highly contested at the moment. Matt Ruckle is the Executive Director of National Parks Association. Matt, welcome. You would be no stranger to knowing that this is really a contested issue, and in Warburton it is. We've already had plenty of people calling and texting through saying that they don't want it in their area. Is it going to go ahead, do you think, at the scale that's being proposed?
From our perspective, the locals have been concerned about it for a whole raft of reasons, which some of them have highlighted about the social impact on the community and so on. But our main concern as an environment group is the impact on the tracks in the Yarra Ranges National Park, which is only a relatively small proportion of the total project. And there's been some key issues with that, impacts on threatened species, the Donabulang wingless stonefly, which only occurs in that one place, and intact, that's one of the best bits of intact cool temperate rainforest. So it's a nuanced argument, I suppose, in the context of Warburton. In general terms, like any infrastructure, you need to put it in the right place to avoid the ecological impacts. And I suppose we've got a bigger concern at a statewide level where you've got an explosion in proposals, and the planning for those things often isn't always in sequence, I suppose. Sometimes the lines are drawn on maps and the assessments and so on haven't been done. So I think there's a whole grab bag of issues, but the bottom line is that it really needs to be put in the right place.
So, Matt, is there a danger if this is a fad that lasts, years or maybe decades, but then starts to drop away? Is there a danger that we are putting too much infrastructure in?
Exactly, and this has happened before, stranded infrastructure. So the two implications of that, you've spent a lot of money on a sport that doesn't last, or you end up with have changes and it's a waste of public money in the construction. You've got to also maintain them, and so there's ongoing maintenance costs. The second part is, how many do you actually need? So there have been some great examples, like the Forest case. There have been great revitalisation projects. I just worry that some local communities see that and go, well, this is the silver bullet, let's build one of them. How many do you actually need at a statewide level? What is the level of interest? I've not seen that work done at a sort of statewide strategic level. So maybe we need some sort of statewide look at it to determine best places. How many do you actually need? What sort?
On the flip side, though, could Victoria not become the Mecca, become known globally as the destination point of where you go for mountain biking? If we look around the world, where does it well? And people travel for things like this. So could we not kind of embrace it?
I don't think I'm saying don't do it. I'm saying think about it before you do it. Design the trails in the right places to avoid the highest ecological impacts. As we heard earlier, people were talking about disturbed areas. Victoria's the most cleared state in Australia. There's large areas of disturbed forest. There's large areas of state forest that are logged heavily and actually could play a very important role in that transition out of native forest logging. So it's all about getting it in the right place for the right reasons, and having a deep understanding of really what is the level of demand into the future.
Yeah, I think it's pretty big. Hey, stay with us, Matt. Just judging by the amount of people ringing in, I think demand in the future it's not going to decline, that's for sure. Dietz is called through. Dietz, welcome. You actually are really involved in this, and you're also the host, I think, on SBS of Trail Towns. Can you see mountain biking tourism declining in the next decade or growing in popularity?
Well, obviously, I think it's going to grow. We created this TV show just by observing what's happening out there in different regions and towns right across Australia, actually. So it's just growing and growing. And I think where it's growing, what's interesting is it's growing in the sort of the less experienced area. The double black riders have probably got a lot of stuff for them now, and they always want more, of course, but it's the mums and dads that don't really want to go to that extreme and with their kids. And if you look at World Trail, about 85% of the trails they build wherever they go are for people that are not super experienced riders. They're for families, for couples, for friends to get out, get into the environment, ride on sanctioned trails and stay in the town and spend money and enjoy life.
It wouldn't put any less, just because they're a different age or demographic, it wouldn't put any less pressure on the environment, though, would it?
Not necessarily, and that's where it's so important that the trails that are ridden on are trails that are sanctioned and that have been approved, and all the approvals processes are adhered to. And what we see, we just came back from New Zealand to do a 6-episode series in New Zealand, and it's incredible. They're almost like 5 years ahead of us, maybe even a bit more, where you have these sanctioned trails, they are properly maintained. There's really not much evidence of trails which are not sanctioned because there are so many great trails. And the environmental concerns and cultural concerns are extremely important. And it's finding that balance. And I think that's the towns that we visit, for instance, Rotorua, which we did partly in an episode, or Taupo, which is another great bike town. They have many other things going for them, but their bike trails are exquisite. They're really well maintained. all the safety aspects are there, and it's about getting the balance right. And when we see towns that do that, it really is an amazing thing to witness, and that's what the show does. It just showcases these towns.
Dietz, you've managed to land yourself a pretty cool job, I have to say, my friend.
It is a good job. I do it with my mate Vandy. He's actually a world champion mountain bike rider, and we just travel around. We actually just came back from the UK. We were going to do a 6-episode series in the UK. What was really interesting was... we chatted with the head of cycling strategy for the UK government when we were there, and he gave us lots of metrics and numbers, which I can't recall now, but it's a massive, massive thing in the UK to get people out on bikes, and they're creating massive pieces of infrastructure right across the UK to the point that they're actually spending £350 million on new bike trails throughout the UK to encourage people to ride. And obviously they want us to come and tell their story. And that's the interesting thing. It's all about everybody working together. And absolutely, we're in a democracy. People can have different opinions. And if we can somehow find that middle ground where everybody is satisfied and everybody, for instance, fire risk, it's really simple. If it's a fire risk day, shut the park.
And Dietz, I mean, it just goes to show, I guess, globally where this is at and where Victoria fits into this as well. Good on you, Dietz. Thank you. And a big thanks as well to Matt Ruckle, who's the Executive Director of National Parks Association. Tex here is saying you're focusing on the sport and money and not focusing on the habitat and what that habitat loss actually means. I mean, we can probably go deeper into that. We have done a lot of programs very similar to this, and obviously you can't cover everything in an hour, but looking at that balance between the consultation between environmental groups, between ecologists as well, and how you balance tourism, infrastructure and the environment. And
each environment has its own particulars. It has its own weed species that are getting out of control, and so we would have to sort of dive deep into specific areas. But the general that general conflict between tourism, local amenity, environment, that is something that is kind of almost universal, I guess.
1300 222 774. Rochelle Hunt with you in Melbourne, Prue Bentley with you in Ballarat, and Creswick and all of the big mountain biking very close to where you are, Prue. After all of this today so far, how are you feeling? Are you going to jump on the bike? Are you going to give it a crack yourself?
I have been watching the kids down at my local forest, and I have been so jealous. As I'm getting older, my mortality is starting to, it's starting to raise its ugly head. Yeah, that's it. But I would absolutely love to give it a go. And knowing that it doesn't have to be the daredevil mountain, down side of a mountain kind of ride, and you can just take a nice leisurely ride in a trail in the forest, I would love to give it a go. I'm starting to kind of come around. I do want to say this, though. We did have somebody text in and say, all your mountain bikers that you've spoken to have been male. So if you're a female mountain biker, give us a call, because I'd love to talk to you this morning, because, as we've been saying, it isn't just a sport for one type of person.
Well, let's have a chat to Lynn Frericks, who's the president of the Beechworth Chain Gang. And you asked to speak to a woman, then your wish is our command.
Look at that.
Lynn, good morning.
Good morning, Gareth.
It's certainly not just blokes that are out there at all. And, I mean, the reason why we spoke to a lot of men earlier is because they were raising different issues that we wanted to make sure that we covered straight up. But, Lynn, you're someone that is heavily involved in the Beechworth area when it comes to cycling. There's a lot of groups, there's a lot of interest, there are a lot of competitions that are happening in your area as well. Is it something that's conflicted in your community around whether or not it's a good thing for the area of Beechworth?
Yes, it is a little bit. Yeah, there's a vocal minority that definitely doesn't think that the money spent on infrastructure for mountain biking and cycling in general is worth it. But if you ask any of the people who actually use the facilities, we would all agree that it is very much worth it and very heavily used by us. And I just want to add too that our club is a little bit different than most clubs. For the person who is a little bit interested in having women speak, our club is 50-50. We've got 50% women in our club. So we're very proud of that.
That's fantastic. And so cool. With the club, I was wondering a little bit earlier about the kind of club versus independent riders. What does a club give you when you join up?
That's a really good point. So in order to be part of the club membership is insurance. So we are all members through Oz Cycling, and so Oz Cycling provides insurance for, like for me, for example, personal indemnity insurance is pretty important, but also personal accident insurance. So that's a pretty big benefit of becoming a member of a club, but it's also being part of a club is really important for just the social benefits and the
also if you fall off, there's someone else with you. That's what I'm thinking.
Or look, if you do a tyre, so there's someone to help you get your tyre back on.
Exactly. And things like the development programs, Prue, we just recently ran a very successful program where 100 women participated in development training on how to be more comfortable on a bike on the trails. So things like that are really important that you wouldn't get if you weren't part of a club.
You moved to the area specifically to be near, I think it's the Indigo Epic Trail. Even just the title of that freaks the hell out of me. Once the word epic is in a trail, you're certainly not going to get me there unless I'm passing you water on the side. But what made you move there to be a part of it?
You'd be all right. You'd be fine on the trail, I reckon.
Yeah,
there's beelines around everything. Yes, I moved here partially because of that Indigo Epic Trail, that infrastructure, and the support that the mountain biking community gives to the council and to the club, and just the camaraderie of the mountain bikers here. It's really quite a fabulous little community that way.
So what do you say when people level accusations at mountain bikers about degrading the environment and not necessarily being, nice to walkers? What do you say to those people?
I think just like we've got the vocal minority of people that are against the infrastructure, I'd say that that's probably the minority of experiences of mountain bikers that aren't being respectful. I'd say the majority of us are out there to have a good time. We're not out there to win sheep stations. I mean, some people probably are, but they're in the very top elite class of mountain bikers. But the majority of us are out there to have a social, fun time. So we're not out there to give a hard time to the walkers or the horse riders, etc.
Lynn,
we're a pretty happy bunch.
It's been fascinating speaking with you. Thanks so much.
Okay, thanks.
That's Lynn Frericks. She's the president of the Beechworth Chain Gang. Text here from someone in Bright saying, my daughter's at school. She's a keen endurance mountain biker. She trains 4 times a week around Warburton, waiting and wanting to be able to compete locally without driving 4 hours to Bright. So that's the other interesting thing too, is that if you are interested in it, and we're talking about whether or not there are just too many places, because that was one of the arguments, saying, look, there's enough spots. We don't need one in Warburton or wherever it may be, because there are other places you can go. How much of this conversation is about access to all as well, that if you do have space in some areas and someone wants to take it up as a sport, it's one of the fastest growing sports that we have, if you have to drive 4 hours.
Is it like having a pool in your town or a basketball court? Is it going to be like that?
Kate Kellett is an elite endurance mountain bike racer. Kate, when you were training in this and when you first got interested, how easy and how much access did you have to mountain bike trails? We'll go to Kate in just a moment. Let's have a chat to Astrid. She's in Warburton. Hi, Astrid.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Look, I'm a Warburton local, and I'm the president of Friends of the Myrtle Beaches, and we formed as a bunch of locals to respond to the environmental statement. Look, I'm a little bit concerned, not only environmentally, but it's, there's sort of a bit of an adversarial bent to this. It's not as if environmentalists are, anti-mountain bike. I think it's about where do you place them? Do you know what I mean? It's all a good thing. Mountain biking's a great thing, but it doesn't belong in the Yarra Ranges National Park. And the reason is because we have all of this cool temperate rainforest with the myrtle beeches. Now, the myrtle beeches are a keystone species of the cool temperate rainforest. If you remove them, a drier forest takes over. It's no longer cool temperate, very, very susceptible to climate change and bushfires. Put more people up there, the increase of fire increases. And wherever you have fire, we already know it's not, it's a
So
fact.
are you saying then, Astrid, you just wouldn't want it there at all in the Warburton area, or you'd like it somewhere different in the Warburton area, or just not there, period?
What I'm saying is that for all of the massive amount of funds, already thrown at this, there hasn't been anything. The environmental, it's not considered, because where you put a trail through cool temperate rainforest and Myrtle Beach suffers from a fatal fungal pathogen called Cholera australis. When in fact the road to Donabuang was built, you had massive die-offs of the trees.
So what you're saying is you've got to get it right the first time.
You have to get it right the first time.
Yeah.
And I think the one road in, one road out, 160 Ks, that's a lot. We were talking right at the very beginning of the program, Prue, where you are in Creswick, that they're talking about 60 kilometres of trail and track. You add 100 Ks to that, and Warburton's not a big area. You can see why this is so heated. And I always wonder in conversations like this, and if this is something that's interested you, we've done tourism and infrastructure and small towns. We've looked into weeds and species and all different sorts of things and deep dived on the Conversation Hour. So go back through some of those programs. But so much of the time it comes back to community consultation, but then diving into what does that really look like, right? And is that just a buzz term and is that just lingo that gets thrown around of, we might have popped a flyer in your letterbox here or there was a small notice in the local paper that you could have come along to, yada, yada, yada. So what is community consultation when it comes to big decisions like this?
That's a whole other program, Rochelle.
Mate, don't even get me started. But at the end of the day, right, it's one of those things, not everyone's going to be happy, are they?
No, but I think, as you say, community consultation isn't just a flyer in a letterbox. It isn't just saying we're going to do this and here's a couple of days to respond. I'm sure that there are a lot of processes that are being followed, but with something as big as what we're talking about in Warburton, those processes need to be really robust.
They really do. Let's try and quickly squeeze in Kate Kellett now, who we didn't have before. Kate, you're a professional mountain biker. Where do you see this issue? Is it possible to keep everybody happy?
Yeah, look, I think it is. I think there's a number of callers that have already touched on this, but I think the key is getting them in the right place. And, we're talking about sanctioned trails here. And so I think if you can identify the right place for the mountain bike park or the sanctioned trails, then that's obviously the first step. There's a number of things, and I think a lot of callers have already touched on this, but when you put in sanctioned trails, along with that comes trail maintenance. And a lot of that is driven by the local clubs. And we've already, obviously discussed what Forest Mountain Bike Club do, and I'm a pretty active member of Geelong Mountain Bike Club. I'm on their committee, and we work really closely with Parks Victoria on that trail maintenance as well. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get people on these sanctioned trails so that there's no, I guess you call it, say, rogue mountain bike activity to minimise the impact on the environment.
And do you have to be, can other people volunteer to help maintain and to work on them that aren't necessarily mountain bikers themselves? Like, does it provide potential opportunities for employment?
Yeah, look, certainly through Geelong Mountain Bike Club, not everybody that's with that club necessarily rides a mountain bike, for example. So we have a lot of parents that are involved that their kids ride, and so we run a Dirt Squirts program, and I think Creed mentioned about, kids on mountain bikes earlier, but, every sort of couple of weeks on a Sunday we'll get 80 kids out there. And, what an amazing environment to get kids into on their weekend, but it's their parents that are heavily involved as well. And they
need everyone, all hands on deck. Kate, thanks for your time and your insights. That's Kate Kellett, who's an elite endurance mountain bike racer. Prue Bentley, ABC Ballarat, you have it on your doorstep this weekend.
That's it. I'm going to go out if I can get a bike. I'm hearing there are shortages of bikes, though, so that's a whole other conversation. Yeah, I'm going to get out there. Give it a go.
Brian Nankervis is on your wireless this afternoon with the Friday